What's up, everybody? I'm Dr. Jordan Taylor, the Undergraduate Exercise Science Program Director and Associate Teaching Professor at the University of Kansas. Today I have Strength and Conditioning Coach Joseph Potts back in the studio again. We're going to show and discuss many of the exercises and training methods he uses to improve athletes' strength, power, speed, agility, endurance, and overall athletic performance while minimizing the risk of injuries. A variety of exercises and training approaches will be highlighted on the show today, including resistance training exercises, abdominal and core stability exercises, plyometrics and jumps, change of direction and agility drills, sled work, resisted sprints, sprint technique, and examples of contrast or complex training. The reasons why these exercises should be performed and his various training approaches implemented will also be explained. Coach Potts owns and operates TopSpeed Strength and Conditioning, a private sports performance training and physical therapy center in Lenexa, Kansas. He is also the head strength and conditioning coach for the Kansas City Current professional women's soccer team and Fort Scott Community College baseball. Previously, he spent 4 years as the strength and speed development coach for the Kansas City Royals baseball team. Coach Potts is a registered strength and conditioning coach through the National Strength and Conditioning Association and a corrective exercise specialist through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. He holds a bachelor's degree in exercise science from the University of Kansas, where he played for the KU football team. Welcome back to the show, Coach Potts.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, so we got a bunch of clips to get through today of, many different athletes in a variety of different sports training at your facility, TopSpeed. So I kind of want to talk about, what each exercise is and why it's done. Because, I think for athletes, I used to be a strength coach. You obviously are. It's like for them to buy into what you're doing, they need to not only be told what to do, but why are we doing this? How is this going to improve my athletic performance? What's the goal of this exercise, this training approach? And so, just kind of walk us through these. Tell us what it is, why they're doing it. And so clip number one, we're going to start out with, because we got a bunch of these to get through. So this first clip, want to tell us about what this is?
So we've got an angled band hip flexion, resisted hip flexion. The athlete's leaning forward against some plyo boxes, and that's just because we're looking for that body angularity. A lot of athletes, whenever they are in acceleration phase, tend to pop straight up. So I wanted him to feel being at an angle relative to the ground while he was going through that resisted hip flexion exercise. And then the hip flexors, this is an often undertrained muscle group. A lot of people don't think of with athletes, I feel like. The hip flexors, the iliopsoas, rectus femoris, pectineus, all those muscles that flex the hip and drive the knee upward. It's obviously important for those muscles to be strong and powerful. And we had talked about that on the way over here. I mean, there's been research into it that showed that elite level sprinters had a psoas region that was about 12% stronger than even what you would consider elite athletes in team sport. Definitely undervalued and undertrained. And then we got this kid actually now is a professional baseball player, Brendan Ryan. He's doing, it'll come back up in a second, but he's doing, I forget what we called him at the time.
Just the dumbbell knee-to-stand?
Yeah. So an alternating kneel down with a stand up. Essentially, we were just training anterior chain strength during motion. Little balance, a little bit of strength, enhanced core activation because he's got the load up above his belly button. It was just kind of a rudimentary, something to take it to the next level, but not be super stressful.
Yeah, and you're going to see
he's pretty young in this.
As we go through this, what I really like is Coach Potts uses a variety of different implements. You saw the band to resist the hip flexion, the angled hip flexion. And then, he's going to use dumbbells, kettlebells, of course, your traditional barbells, but things like the Real Runner, resisted sprint. He uses so many different things, and you're going to see as we go through these clips a variety of different training methods and approaches. All right, so let's go to clip number 2. So what do we got here?
We got Kelly McKee, who actually just competed in the Olympic trials for USA.
Triple jump, right?
Triple jump, yep. She didn't make the team, but she's coming off of a multi-year layoff. So to be top 20 in the country, I don't know where she is relative to the world, but top 20 in the U.S. after, I think, about a 2-year layoff. I'll take it. So she is doing what we titled earthquake lunges. Essentially, typical barbell lunge, only we've added kettlebells with the bands. That way there's a bit of dynamic movement to it. So not only is she getting the strength development from the load itself, the static load, but then she gets a bit of kinetic stress because the bells will pull that barbell down with some velocity onto her as well. So that was the purpose there.
Yeah, so having to really stabilize, control the eccentric phase as you're stepping forward and having to decelerate your body down. And then, of course, training the glutes, the quadriceps, and it's a unilateral exercise. Which,
and she gets some enhanced trunk activation as well because of that asymmetry to their bounce. You can see.
Yeah, really cool. All right, we will go to clip number 3. So this is old video, right?
Very old. Like I said, this was
screen recorded
a Vine.
Right, we screen recorded some of these. Some I was able to download. Some we screen recorded off his Instagram, which I encourage everybody to check out. But talk about what we got going on here.
So we've got that is Ryan McNellis. He was a high school football player and later a collegiate football player. He's doing a barbell hip thrust. Standard run-of-the-mill barbell hip thrust. We've actually gotten away from these, though, because we were seeing a lot of low back issues. Not a lot, but guys would come back from the collegiate setting and said that this was one of their primary exercises, and they were dealing with some PARS issues. So we've gotten away from the barbell load and gone more towards the band-loaded ones.
Right, so just strapping a band across basically
so we picked
the pelvis.
up, I forget what they're called, glute thrust, hip thrust apparatus. Essentially, it's got an elevated pad for the shoulders and a platform for the feet, and it's got several anchors alongside, and we'll have them hook on 1, 2, 3 bands, whatever they need.
Like a seatbelt.
Yep, and they'll go into that hip thrust action. And it really enhances the top half, which is that near triple extension. If you were sprinting, that kind of toe-off position is what we're looking for. We'll do them in a unilateral, bilateral fashion. But yeah, this is a super old one.
Yeah, so with the band, obviously, as the athlete extends their hips, drives through the floor with their feet, and they raise their hips up, obviously those bands are going to lengthen and you're going to have more tension applied as you ascend up to the top of the lift. So that's where the bands can be really beneficial, especially for like any exercise that has what's called an ascending strength curve. I'm trying to remember what else I was going to add. When you mentioned the PARS defects and PARS issues, so there's a region, if you think about the lumbar spine, called the pars interarticularis region. And in a lot of athletes, I know it happens like in football players, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, they're really getting pushed and driven back into hyperextension a lot. They can get some damage to that bony region of the vertebrae, especially in the lumbar back. And this is an exercise you can really, really load. And I'm sure some athletes load it too heavy. And then you have that downward force into the spine. You know, you're trying to drive up, but the weight is driving down into that, some tensile stress and on the low back, some shearing. And so the shearing stress is what could be, if it's loaded too heavily, damaging to that bony region of the low back. And then you can actually get the vertebrae kind of slipping forward. So you get some spondylolysis and spondylolisthesis where they slip forward one vertebra on top of the other. So you don't want that. So yeah, I think what you're saying is maybe using those bands is a little bit safer.
It was a smarter approach.
And you don't want to be the strength coach, right? That's like injuring the athletes before the season starts or anything. It's like, no, you're trying to enhance athletic performance, not do anything that's going to, make an impact on them, injure them where they cannot play.
Exactly.
So
best ability is availability. So.
Exactly. So we'll go to clip number 4.
So here we've got Northwestern University offensive lineman Nick Herzog. The purpose of this exercise is I wanted to artificially raise his center of mass. So I had him go overhead with his load. We're manipulating the force time curve there a bit. But it's also got the benefit of enhanced trunk and shoulder stress, as well as that unilateral strength that we're looking for there.
Right.
And I believe I have him pause in this, so he's got to overcome a bit of inertia as well to get going, just like he would in a game scenario.
Right, so he's pausing at the bottom. Yeah, so these are the barbell overhead Bulgarian split squats. Great exercise, just regular split squats. But like you said, by having that load overhead, you're basically raising his center of gravity. You've got a longer lever there, so he's really going to have to control his trunk.
And that's the chains really enhance that shoulder stress, the trunk stress, and a bit of proprioceptive action occurring in the lower leg.
Shoulder stabilization. Yeah, that's all really good. All right, we'll go to clip number 5. And I think this is just an image.
Yeah,
so
it's just a photo. So we got LSU freshman Ashton Larson. He's doing a barbell reverse lunge. I think the load's 300, plus he's got the chains, which are additional 25. Right here, we're just going for strength, plain and simple. Although I am a big fan of training the proprioceptive element whenever you can. So that's what we're doing with the chains, because it is a lunge and he's got that motion to the movement. He gets a bit of proprioceptive action through the ankle.
And when he's at the bottom, I'm trying to tell from that clip, he's not quite all the way down. Now, you're not using chains that are long enough to actually...
No, and that's what, if we were trying to get the variable resistance, we'd go with a longer chain.
Right.
But because we just want that proprioceptive element.
Right, okay.
We want that sway.
Right. All right. Clip number 6. So this is a still image, and then I think you're going to see some other exercises here that Elijah Lee is doing. So.
Yep.
Former K-State Wildcat, Chiefs linebacker.
Got a Super Bowl ring with the Chiefs.
So what do we have here with Elijah?
Obviously, with a linebacker, one of the biggest threats to their on-field availability is shoulder injury. So we were going with an overhead press with the proprioceptive element of the earthquake, as we call it.
The bands and the kettlebells. Yeah, giving that bar that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, he actually really, really enjoyed these. But yeah, again, just looking for the ability to stabilize under a bit of dynamic stress, keep them healthy, keep them on the field.
And then we'll go to the next. I think this is the front squats. The next exercise Elijah's doing, the front squat with the Tendo unit. No, stay on that clip and just let it play. Yeah, so here's the front squat.
Yeah. And this was probably a contrast pairing, if I remember correctly. So we've got some VBT front squats, and then supersetting it with a seated box jump. Just looking for basically surfing the force velocity curve there, training power as our ultimate goal.
And if we go back to that front squat, you can see there's a little string like attached to the barbell. So there's a unit there, this Tendo unit measures the bar speed, the velocity, and tracks that.
I can't tell if that's our actual Tendo unit or if we were using the gravity box at the time, but a company sent us 3 or 4 units to test out. They were called gravity boxes. Essentially just a Tendo unit with a smaller footprint. Yeah.
And then what he's talking about, contrast pairing, and we're going to show more examples. So he does a front squat, and then he goes into those box jumps. So with contrast pairings, you do a weight training, a resistance exercise, and then you follow that with an explosive high velocity like plyometric movement that's biomechanically similar to the resistance exercise that preceded it. And what that does is it creates something called muscle potentiation. So you're basically kind of priming the neuromuscular system with the resistance training exercise, the front squat, and then you're going into the box jump. And what they've shown is, if you do a resistance training exercise, not to fatigue, but you load it, pretty heavily, do a resistance training exercise, and then do a plyometric after it, or you do a sprint, that your jump height, your sprint speed, all of that can be enhanced by the preceding resistance training movement. As long as you're not taking it to fatigue, you know, you're just kind of, like I said, trying to kind of turn on the lights, turn on the neuromuscular system. Then you go into that explosive movement or that sprint, and your performance is generally going to be better.
Yeah. And I'm a fan of these because of the RFD element.
The box jumps, yeah.
Yeah. Well, not even that, but getting rid of the counter movement phase,
right,
and making him apply that force quick. That way we're training that rate of force development.
Rate of force development, right? It's not just about being able to produce force. Like, you obviously have to produce force to do a front squat or a back squat and get that load up. But it's being able to produce force at a very fast rate. That's what's important for on-field performance and as an athlete, right? You want to be able to display force rapidly in a short amount of time. And like you said, doing these seated box jumps, that's what's going to, you're really working on there.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll go to the next clip. We're going to stick with Elijah here on clip 7. Now, I had never seen these before until I started surfing your Instagram a bit. These are really cool. So talk about what these are.
Yeah, I've seen a couple other coaches who implement these, but yeah, it's not a very common exercise. So we called these Shockwave Rows. So essentially, he's got a pretty good amount of weight set up on our reverse hyper. So it's a pendulum pull, and he's holding the band. So he goes into that initial movement, that row movement, but then he's got to deal with the weight swinging back away from him. So he gets an eccentric shock through that upper back. And then as we make him hold, so he has to deal with the perturbation as well, get some, I guess, what you would call aftershocks.
Yeah, I mean, the elasticity of those bands trying to pull him forward. He's really got to anchor himself to the ground there, too, to control his core. But yeah, I mean, you know, when he does the concentric motion and rows backwards, obviously it's working his lats and his rhomboids, those upper back muscles, posterior delts. But then he's got to control it, boom, right there, because it's trying to pull him forward. So again, controlling that scapula through the upper back.
And he's getting some anterior chain stress on the lower half as well. He's got to really, put some GRF into the ground to stay stable.
Yeah, that's a really cool exercise. And I like the pendulum motion. You know, when you're rowing, I mean, it's mimicking kind of that natural arc of how, like the line of pull of the lats and those muscles, the direction that the fibers align and how they would actually pull. So, that's a really cool exercise. Like I said, I'd never seen it before.
We actually even had to get a more heavy-duty machine because you can't see them. They're off camera. But we have an athlete anchoring the machine down because it would start to rock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, safety first, no injuries, right? Let's go to number 8, next one. So, everyone's seen a basic bench press before, but here we're doing, floor presses with the bar.
We got a floor press.
So what's the point of doing these presses from the floor?
So this particular athlete, Keon Houghton, went on to play professional football in the Arena League, I believe. He was getting ready for the time the bench press at the NFL Pro Day, which obviously that's a
225 bench.
Yeah, that's a muscle endurance. So we're essentially going the opposite end of the spectrum. We're training max strength. I think he's got 365 on the bar, but essentially it allows us to train a high intensity effort while minimizing risk to the shoulder and pec. We actually had one guy, I believe just the year before, actually day of his pro day, he was on rep 18 to 20 something and suffered a pec tear. So, we're trying to train, but at the same time minimize our risk so that we can keep our athletes healthy.
Right, because if you're doing a floor press, if you think of a regular bench press, you can get really deep into what's called horizontal abduction at the shoulder, right? And so that's really stretching those pec muscles out, putting a little more torque on the shoulder joint as you have to come out of the hole from the bottom. But if you're doing a floor press, obviously the floor is going to resist how much horizontal abduction you go into, meaning how far back you can bring those elbows and the upper arm. So it is going to protect that shoulder joint and the pec a little bit more.
And you see it every year at the NFL Combine. I think every year there has been at least one pec tear there at the combine. I mean, they've debated getting rid of that test because it's such a common injury.
Yeah. And it is, like you said, the 225 bench press test at the combine. It's more a test of muscular endurance. And who cares about your chest muscle muscular endurance as a NFL player? Max strength we care about. But yeah, you'd almost think it might be safer to just do like a 3 repetition max test or a 5 rep max test, and then you could like estimate their strength, their 1 rep max from that load.
We did an audit of the NFL Combine back in 2017, some other coaches and I, and the thing we recommended was some type of throw. Have a load or
like explosive medicine ball throws and measure distance.
I mean, with our ability
like
to track bar velocity these days, 225, how fast can you move it?
That's
something like that.
I like that. I agree with that totally.
It'd be a smarter approach than what's currently happening.
You think about your DN alignment and you're punching. Yeah. I mean it's explosive. So it's like who cares about how many reps you can do? It's like can you explode?
This is one of the dumber tests the NFL still hangs on to.
Yep, I agree. All right, next one we'll go to clip 9. So again, you'll notice all these initial clips we're kind of going through our resistance training exercise, body weight exercises. So what do we have here?
We got Parker Dizador. He is nicknamed the Ninja. So he finished his set of Nordics and celebrated with a standing backflip. This is another exercise we've actually recently gone away from. I know whenever they first kind of became popular.
Oh, so you've gone away from the Nordic curl.
Gone away from them. It was the performance staff with Arsenal, which I may be butchering that name, but it's one of the premier soccer teams in the world. Their performance staff did a re-review of the research. Whenever these first came out, they were rumored to reduce hamstring injuries.
Big reductions in hamstring injury rates in soccer players, football players, And
ultimately, what they saw was despite the increasing popularity of these, hamstring injury rates were actually getting worse. So Arsenal's performance staff did a re-review and found out that the research was misinterpreted. And ultimately, they concluded that this exercise, depending on when you implement it, at best has minimal to no effect and may actually increase your risk of injury if you're implementing them too close to competition.
Right.
Because, I mean, you can see there's a huge eccentric element there, which we know is going to have a big effect on your type 2X fibers. You're probably going to make them dormant for, in an elite population, 48 to 72 hours. In an untrained population, it's 4 days plus.
And what he means by eccentric load. So as you see this athlete here that's lowering, they're on their knees and they're lowering their torso down to the floor slowly. Those hamstrings are lengthening out, but they're having to produce tension to control that so he doesn't do a face plant into the floor. So, and generally the way you suffer, the theory behind this was, well, let's train the muscle eccentrically, put it under tension as it lengthens, because that's generally when you see hamstring strains occur, is when the muscle is lengthening under tension and trying to control the swing of the leg. And that makes sense in theory. Now, I'd have to dig back into a lot of the research on this, but it sounds like some of those studies, and when Arsenal did the review, they were association studies or correlative. So sometimes A and B can be related, but A doesn't necessarily cause B.
Right.
So it's like, you may have athletes that are doing a lot of these and sustain hamstring injuries, but there could be other factors too that led to them having the injury, not just doing that exercise.
And one of my concerns with the early research is it could have been funded by a company that was producing an exercise implement for this.
Yeah. So students, anybody that's reading through research, after you read through the research article and you get past the conclusion section, always check like in the acknowledgments and at the very end of that article and see who funded it. That is true, because you generally want studies that are produced without a bias, like a biased source of funding. So things to think about. All righty, so we'll go to clip number 10.
So we've got former Eagles and Bears safety DeAndre Hall and cornerback Devontae Bosby there. They're doing what we just call the landmine side-to-side press. Essentially, we're training the delts, and this is a way for us to get some volume there without having to use like a lot of load per se.
Right.
You know, the landmine takes a lot of the stress off of the shoulder.
Yeah, that angle that you're pressing at, obviously you're getting that anterior delt work, but it's not like your traditional overhead press where you're really getting a lot of compressive forces down into the joint at the top of the lift. And you're not, it's like a safer way to apply torque to the joint.
Bingo.
The
and
external
with this population, I don't know that I have met a collegiate or professional football player that has what I would call a healthy shoulder. They all have damage. So it was a way for us to do some hypertrophy work. Like you said, minimizing risk. One thing here, like you mentioned, the angle. So that's why I try to always tell the athletes, hey, I want an overlapping grip for this exercise instead of like a stacked grip.
Right.
That way, as much as we can, we keep that angle pretty similar between the shoulders.
And, you know, a little core stability work in there with rotating from side to side. So, you know, keeping those obliques and transverse abdominis and rectus all tight through the core, stabilizing. So, yeah, I like that little twist on, you know, what generally on, you know, a lot of strength coaches will just stick with like an overhead press.
Yeah.
But I like the twist on it. All right, so we'll go to the next clip.
We've got some reverse bear crawls. I think this was Darius Shepard and probably Bosby later.
This is loaded too. You can see the plate strapped down on his back there.
So we get a bit of proprioceptive work, but ultimately the overarching goal here is training the serratus anterior.
So let's talk about the serratus. Serratus anterior is a muscle that attaches to the underneath side of the shoulder blade, the scapula and back, and it wraps around here. It's called serratus because it's kind of serrated like a steak knife where it inserts and it kind of ties into the external oblique around the side. They call it the boxer's muscle. So you see boxers that are throwing a lot of punches, you know, to throw that punch and extend and protract the scapula to where they come around the side of the back. That muscle really gets trained. So it really helps to pull the scapula into what's called protraction around the rib cage. And, you know, having good scapular mobility and strong scapular stabilizer muscles that connect to that scapula is very important for shoulder joint health. So if your scapula and back, the shoulder blade doesn't rotate upward and downward along the rib cage, it doesn't move in towards the spine and then protract away from it around the sides, it can put a lot of stress on the glenohumeral joint, the shoulder joint. And then the shoulder joint doesn't move as efficiently because the scapula and back and the muscles that are tied to it, it's not moving properly. So often overlooked, that serratus anterior muscle strength. So I think you would agree, you know, anybody that's a pitcher, a quarterback, an overhead throwing athlete, that serratus anterior needs to be strengthened.
Volleyball players, football players. It's in football just more so because of the overall shoulder health.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways you can train it. Like I said, doing these bear crawls, you can do what's called a protraction push-up, where you keep your elbows extended, and then in back, you just retract the shoulder blades and then protract. Yeah. So it's like you're squeezing the shoulder blades together, pushing them apart. I know punching. There's different ways. Banded presses that you can do, just working on that protraction, retraction of the shoulder blades. So yeah, it's an often overlooked muscle. Let's go on to the next one, clip 12.
I can't, that might be Elijah. But yeah, we've got an overhead lateral lunge. Same thing, same purpose as with Nick, artificially raising the center of mass and putting them into that stressful position under motion. And then we've got some overhead lunges with chains again. Same reasons as before. Artificially raising that center of mass so we get enhanced trunk stabilization requirements, enhanced shoulder stabilization requirements. There's crawl.
Yeah. And this is great because with the lateral lunge here, you know, you're working in what's called the frontal plane.
Yep.
So any movements that you're doing side to side, you know, you think maybe it's a point guard in basketball that's going to do a crossover, right? And they've got a jab step to the right, crossover to the left. That's occurring in the frontal plane. Maybe you're a defender guarding that point guard and you've got to laterally shuffle to the right or the left. That's occurring in the frontal plane. You know, driving off, let's say you're a pitcher on the mound and you're in the stretch.
Yep.
You're driving off that back leg that's against the rubber, and that movement is kind of starting in that frontal plane, right? So And a lot of strength coaches don't do much work in the frontal plane, but this is a great example of some work you can do there.
Each year I get at least a few dozen collegiate strength programs sent to me for evaluation. And the number one thing missing overwhelmingly is frontal plane work.
Frontal plane work, yeah. Work on that lateral side to side. And you think about sports where the soccer, football, running back breaks into the open fields, got to make a cut to juke a defensive back. What are you doing? Planting hard with the right foot, doing a jump cut to the left. That's a frontal plane, that lateral motion. So that needs to be trained and worked on. So yeah, it's great to see you implement those lateral movements as well as your typical, front sagittal plane lunges that are moving front to back. Everyone does those. So, all right, let's go to clip
13.
number 13.
Got some more frontal plane work. So this
these.
Yeah. That was, I believe that was Robert Moore in the first one, and that was Colin Guerra, I believe, in the second one here.
Yeah.
Both baseball athletes. Robert's with the Phillies organization right now. Colin is about to go on to college. But essentially, we're looking for, again, almost like the Shockwave Rows again, some eccentric shock by having the coach apply that velocity to the movement.
Right. The athlete is having to control the landing and decelerate their body under control. So, when that foot hits the ground, boy, those quads are really having to fire eccentrically to control the amount of knee flexion they go into.
And it's happening at a speed more similar to what you would see on field versus a traditional exercise.
And again, in that lateral or frontal plane they're working in, and controlling that eccentric load. I mean, God, I would think this would be great for ACL injury prevention too.
Yeah.
We were talking about ACL injuries on the way up here, but this is, I really like these. And then, like you said in the one clip, you have the athlete actually holding the load overhead. That's going to be even more difficult with raising the center of mass or center of gravity. And
so he's taking a bit longer to apply that force, and because of that artificially raised center of mass, and get back up, whereas Robert's able to just kind of punch into the ground and get back to standing.
Another thing, this is also great for, if you're a strength coach that doesn't have a lot of equipment, you don't have a lot of heavy dumbbells, because some athletes that are really strong could really use, if you're doing a typical lateral lunge with, say, some dumbbells, they can really load up and do it. But it doesn't take much load. You don't need much weight here.
No, the kinetic stress here is doing the work.
Right. Yeah. All right, so we will go on to clip 14.
This has got to be an old one, too.
This is Riley Pint.
Yep, back in high school. Rotational or windmill med ball slams. Training ultimately power is what we're going for here in a plane similar to his pitching motion.
Right. And when he says power, again, for my students, it's simply force times velocity. So a high force movement performed very rapidly. That's one of the benefits of medicine ball training, right? So, and really you're working, it's almost a full body. There's a lot of things you're working here, but core muscles and lats and tricep, and even using the lower body musculature to generate that power and complete the med ball
interesting
slam.
Too, because the research out there shows that, like, with this younger high school age population, you'll see improvement in throwing velocity. But as they get older, it tends to be less so. Like, it doesn't carry on. Like, it's not a static adaptation that occurs throughout life. You really need to capitalize on it when they're at this age.
When they're young, yeah. All right, we'll go to clip number 15. Some of these are just, I believe, pictures, but maybe just let these roll through.
Yeah, you got Denver Broncos tight end Lucas Krull, and then University of Kansas soccer player Olivia Page there doing a unilateral single leg stability ball leg curl. The reason we implement these is back when I was just getting into coaching at the professional level. Obviously, a lot of times you don't have a lot of equipment, especially like baseball when you're on the road. So you might not have access to a prone hamstring machine.
You're taking some of it on the road with you. Yeah.
So our ATC at the time had a study that showed that this exercise had the highest level of muscle activation So that's something that's always stuck with me.
Compared to other hamstring exercises.
And I've included some of the research here in the, I don't know what you would call them, the other clips as you scroll through. But yeah, kind of backs up what he was saying. And not only that, but whenever we're doing it in the unilateral fashion, we're getting that proprioceptive element where they've really got to stabilize through the adductors and things like that.
Yeah. So you're doing unilateral. You can't rely on that other leg to stabilize. And, really stressing that hamstring, like you said, the adductor muscles on the inner thigh, abductor, and also then just bridging off the ground, keeping those glutes.
The glutes, the low back.
Fired to keep the hips off the ground, and then, the abdominal muscles as well.
I think even maybe Lucas, the very first slide, he might even have his arms crossed over his chest while he's doing it. That takes it to a whole nother level.
Right, because normally, he does.
He's at what I would probably call stage 2. If 3 is arms crossed, he's got just the elbows, whereas Liv has her full arms.
So more points of contact. You're spreading out. It's going to be more stable. Yeah, but you bring those arms in. That's how you can just tweak exercises to progress them and make them a little more difficult. So it's like maybe you start out with the arm spread. Then as you get more proficient at performing that exercise, you bring them in and challenge yourself even more. So always thinking of ways to progress, right? Even, with one exercise, there's so many ways you can tweak it to progress it and make it more difficult as the athlete becomes accustomed to it. So, all right, we'll go to clip 16. I think this is the last resistance training exercise demo before we get into the abdominal and core stability stuff. But
I can't tell who that is, but here, like you were talking, the adaptive load. So the chains here in their lengthened state, they go down to the ground. Again, ultimately, we're training for power here. He's got a Tendo unit hooked up so that he can monitor how quickly he's going through the exercise, and the chains are giving us that variable resistance. So it's a bit more difficult as he reaches the top of the movement.
Right. So yeah, in a typical squat, and anybody that's done a barbell back squat, like even without change, it's toughest coming out of the hole, coming up from the bottom. As you ascend towards the top of the lift, you extend your hips, your knees, and reach the top, it becomes easier. And that's what's called an ascending strength curve, right? It gets easier at the top because you're stronger at the top of the lift. With those chains, as you rise up to the top of the lift and the links are coming off the ground of the chain, it makes it more difficult to do the lift. So it's harder to do it typically where you're stronger, which is the top portion of the lift. So yeah, as you approach the top, those chains coming off the ground, it just makes it more difficult and challenging.
And we'll even do like I think we call them a bottom up variation where, the bar will be set so that they only have to achieve about 25% of a normal squat. So we're training just that top end. And I mean, we had a guy, a collegiate football player, he actually bent one of the bars because he had to load it with 800 plus pounds to achieve any sort of stimulus.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you are very much stronger at the top.
Right. You load it with 800 pounds in that top portion of the lift. But yeah, if you had to go all the way down to like below parallel, you'd probably bottom out and be stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you do. You need to overload that top
and he
portion.
bent I let him take it home. He bent the barbell because he was moving it with such a good velocity.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We'll go to the next clip, which would be in the abdominal and core stability training category. So clip 17. Old school exercise here, but a little twist on it, right?
A little bit. Looking to enhance the activation through the entire trunk musculature. So this is Jeff Gurley. He's a former collegiate football player. Just your normal average ab wheel rollout. But we've got his knees on a Bosu ball, so he's got a little bit of instability through that trunk.
You see that a lot. Coach Potts is creating instability throughout different regions of the body on these different exercises. And, really, like you said, stressing that proprioceptive system. And proprioception is just, your body maintains balance in several different ways. One is visual. That's the main way we try to maintain balance as we navigate and move through our environment. One is the vestibular system in the inner ear. And then you have the proprioceptive system, which is basically a bunch of receptors around your joints, inside your muscles that are constantly sending information into the spinal cord and brain about your body's position in space. So it's like if I close my eyes right now and I was going to get up and stand on one leg, I have little proprioceptors around my ankle joint, my knees, my hips. I have them in my muscles, and they're sending information into the brain, these nerve impulses about the position of those joints, so that I can maintain my balance while I'm standing there without any visual input. And so you can train proprioception by creating instability throughout the body, and you see that with his Bosu balls on the.
And I came across a study not too long ago, sometime last year, out of Europe, that identified proprioception, the ability to propriocept, as a separator between the starters at the professional level and the backups at the professional level.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting to me, kind of validated all that work we've been doing.
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, those proprioceptors are really going to be having to fire up and send that information into the brain when he's on that unstable Bosu ball versus being on the stable floor. Okay. All right, so we'll go to clip number 18. This I showed in our speed. We have a speed and sprint technique video, but we were talking about rotation and sprinting of the core. So I know I've shown this in a previus video, but
and that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve here is anti-movement in the face of external force. So he's setting up in a balanced position. He's got a rigid core, and that band is applying that eccentric shock through the trunk. And we would like him ideally not to move at all.
Right.
But that's a bit unrealistic expectation. So yeah, I honestly forget what we call this. We have some that we title like ninja core moves.
Right.
This would be one of those. And like you mentioned, we actually have his eyes closed here so that he can't see and prepare for that shot.
Yeah, he can't anticipate. That's really good. So he's relying solely on, he's going to feel it when that band hits the broomstick, and then he's going to have to really engage his obliques, the transverse abdominis. Transverse abdominis is like this deep muscle that's kind of like a weight belt, really, around your spine. I mean, it's deep down in the behind the other abdominal muscles, and it really helps to stabilize your spine and your core. So engaging the transverse abdominis, the external oblique. Boy, the right external oblique is really going to have to contract eccentrically and then isometrically to resist that load, and then the left internal oblique would have to contract eccentrically and isometrically to prevent the trunk from rotating. And maybe talk about why, with the core muscles, why it's so important to have the strength there that you have that anti-rotation strength, and you don't have the spine rotating excessively like when you're sprinting or...
So I forget which presenter it was, but there was a presenter at one of the Midwest Sports Performance Conferences here at the University of Kansas, and he said a line. He said the role of the core, the trunk, is to resist extraneous movement in the face of external force. Essentially mitigating energy leak. If you've got, like, I'll be honest with you, the catchers in the baseball population, you can, with probably 99% accuracy, identify a catcher by watching him run. A lot of them tend to have this over-exaggerated shoulder swing as they're running, and it's
creating that energy leak.
Yeah, exactly. Where if they were a bit more rigid, if you could clean that up, you see better speeds out of them.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, sprinting, you don't want any of that extra rotation, or you're losing the ability to transmit that force into the ground and up through the body to the arms. So, yeah, great exercise. Really like it. Move on to clip number 19. So the nunchuck cable slow motion swings.
So I just called them slow motion swings. Essentially just trying to train the plane in which the swing occurs with a good amount of load. And the cable machine allowed us to have some constant tension throughout the movement. Like, that's the point of having to control it versus like, hey, I had to tell him, like, I don't really want you to swing this. If you can swing this, it's too light.
Right.
Like, let's work on just a nice, clean rotation under a bit of intensity here.
Yeah, rotation through the thoracic,
So
lumbar spine.
we had what looks like one half of a nunchuck. We attach it to the cable. They're allowed to use their stacked grip, and it really, really lights up the every muscle used during a rotational core movement.
Right. Yep. Obliques, really getting a lot of work here. So, yeah, great for baseball players, softball players, any athlete that's going to be involved in a lot of, trunk rotation. So training that. Let's go on to clip number 20.
So Coach Sindish is still to this day very, very, very athletic. I mean, we're talking about a guy that out of his NFL pro day jumped 37 plus, ran 4.4, great athlete. So he still trains. He'll train with some of the guys. But essentially body saws, the traditional body saw exercise was getting too easy for him. And so we went to what we call the tripod style, which was both feet were on sliders, but one arm was your anchor and the other arm was kept elevated. And eventually those got too easy. So we took away another point of contact and gave him only 2 points of contact.
So the left elbow and the right foot.
Yeah. Like, I believe this is Bryce Tornaden, who played here at the University of Kansas and then professionally in the XFL and UFL. But yeah, he's got 2 points of contact. So he's really hitting that transverse abdominis. And this is not an easy exercise. And I'm impressed by the how clean he is while he's doing it.
Yeah. So just keeping his body rigid, like strong as steel, head to toe, right? And just
this is
again,
I'm understating
major core stability work. Major
exactly.
core stability work here. Yeah, that is not easy.
No.
All right, we'll go to the next one. Now, this one I like, and I'm sure people underestimate how difficult this is. We're going to go to clip number 21. These are the wheelbarrow runs.
Yeah.
So talk about this.
I can't tell which athlete that is. But essentially, I had a wheelbarrow that I bought. I wanted to train the obliques and the trunk in motion because I think that's a thing that separates like great route runners from not so great route runners.
Yeah, body control. And being able to control that torso.
Exactly. I mean, I remember the days when the Kansas City Chiefs, their top wide receiver was a guy that ran like a 4.7, but he ran the cleanest routes that you could imagine. And
it's like Jerry Rice. I think Rice ran a 4.7, but his routes were just so crisp and perfect that.
So I wanted to find a way to train the trunk and body control during an element of kinetic stress.
Yeah.
So here, I think we were encouraging them. How many passes, how many laps can you get? And you can see 10 minutes later, it's still wiped out.
What's the load in there? How many? You got medicine balls in there. Do you know what a typical load maybe he was using here?
Let me think. 100 to 120 pounds of med balls loaded up in there. And now we actually have a plate loaded one that's a bit longer. I think Titan Fitness makes one, and we got one of those. Which, pros and cons. It's longer. It takes more room.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was a fun one.
Yeah. Dynamic body control, right? Important as an athlete, like being able to control your body as you're moving. Okay, let's go on to, we kind of went through the abdominal and core stability training category. Now we're going to go into plyometrics and jumps. So I really love this stuff. I enjoyed doing plyometrics back when I was an athlete. But this first clip, so we're here on clip number 22. So we've got this depth jump here with an acceleration, a burst finish.
Yep. So Mizzou running back Anthony Fabro, he's coming from about, I think it's 47 inches. It's a lot of eccentric shock. Coach Hallwoodell and I, back when he was at Washburn University, we used his force plates, and we did some research into how much load an athlete encounters from different fall heights. And I want to say this was around 4 to 4+ times body weight that they were encountering.
Which, good point here. I just thought of this. Sorry to cut you off, but typically if an athlete is sprinting at max speed, they can encounter ground reaction forces that are 3, 4, 5 times their body weight.
Yep.
And maybe even if it's an elite sprinter, up to 6 or 7 times their body weight I've seen, but probably more typically up around 5.
5 was the upper threshold I had seen, and that's occurring in a unilateral fashion, which tells you, the stress the body can withstand. So here he's landing in a bilateral fashion, but he's got to jump. So he has to have a rapid rate of force development, and then we want him to sprint, I think it was 5 yards. That way he's not only overcoming that eccentric shock, but he's getting a bit of RFD work and then a bit of acceleration work too.
Right. Yeah. And
we're filling a lot of buckets with this exercise.
You are. I really like this. It's handling those ground reaction forces from the obviously it's going to be more difficult the higher up that you place them on a box.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a greater ground reaction force if you're dropping or you're doing the depth jump from a higher height versus a lower. But then, like you said, this being able to spring off the ground, boom, create that force rapidly,
and you
right?
can
Rate
see
of force development
even
power.
like his body goes into that acceleration posture. He gets low, and he does this very well.
Yeah, you can see it from the side,
that
which
side,
you would expect from a running back.
Yeah.
I mean, they're coming out of their stance low.
Yep.
Good horizontal force vector. You see it. He's really producing driving down and back, which is important in that acceleration, that drive phase. To be able to produce that force horizontally and get your body moving forward fast. And like you said, you see it. I'm sure you're looking at it from the side. Does he pop up quick or is he driving forward? And he gets out really good.
Yep.
Nice body lean.
I want to say he sent me the numbers from Mizzou from their testing. I want to say he's either the fastest or top 3 in the 2+10 drill is becoming really popular as a way to measure acceleration, and he's one of the top guys at Mizzou.
Yeah. All righty, we'll go to clip 23. So the band-resisted jumps.
Broad jumps. Yeah. So the benefits of a typical broad jump exercise, only we're adding a bit of that dynamic resistance to it through the band, so they have to get a bit more out of their hips,
right,
to displace.
Really having to powerfully extend those hips, and
both of these guys are like 6'4", 6'5" too, so they've got a broad range of motion to go through.
Yeah.
It's one of our funner exercises. Plus the band, if anybody's got any like knee tendinopathy, it mitigates a bit of the landing force as well.
Yeah, it would help them control the landing. Yeah, this is really good. Yeah. So great for training those glutes to contract powerfully, and also the quads. And then, like you said, it really does kind of help mitigate that landing, all the forces that they're gonna incur there. So, all right, we'll go to
24.
Clip number 24.
So we've got KU running back Devin Neal, and I led off with a clip from practice that was posted because you can kind of see this element in play there. But essentially, we're training.
Can you start back at the beginning, Missy? We'll go through that just so we can talk, because he's going to there's a short clip of him doing an exercise.
And it happens right there. Like he leaves that guy, he makes a little jump cut move, and that guy ultimately misses the tackle.
And then you're training the jump cut coming up here.
So everyone in these clips plays the running back position. And essentially we were just training a whole spectrum of jump cuts.
And he's doing this with band resistance.
Yeah.
So the band is resisting him as he's jumping to the right there.
Yeah. So we got a band resisted jump cut. And then we also did, I believe we did an accentuated reposition as well. So he was doing the resisted to assisted, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And then this is Favreau just working that elastic reactive quality in the jump cut. And I think there's a few other variations that we follow up with, probably unilateral. Yep.
Yeah.
And then I think there's one more as well.
Yeah, running back Jackson Surratt. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just a bigger ground coverage there.
Yeah. Yep. Again, importance of movement in that frontal or lateral plane. I mean, you're training it right there, so you can, you know, obviously with those lateral barbell lunges, you know, training that force output and strength there, and then more explosive, working on rate of force development in that frontal or lateral plane with these jump cuts and lateral hurdle jumps and everything. So very important for any athlete, because unless you're a 100-meter sprinter, maybe a 60-meter indoor sprinter, you're not running really linearly. You're cutting all the time in any sport.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. We'll go into clip 25. And this is just impressive. So talk about Jaden Woods.
So he recently committed to Penn State. He's a 6'3", 230-pound athlete, and he hits 41.1 inches on this jump right here. It was just damn impressive.
Yeah.
To see an athlete with that frame hit this type of displacement. We've had a good year from the jump training side of things. We've got more 40-inch jumpers than I can recall in top speed history that have occurred since 2023. But the number of kids over 220 pounds doing it it's really rare.
Like you said, that's a lot of weight to displace off the ground and get up into the air. So
he is probably our heaviest of all time to go 40 plus.
He's only in high school. Remember that.
Yeah,
so
he'll be a senior in high school this year.
Yeah.
Charlie Wolben, the defensive end who's committed to Iowa State out of our program, he just hit 40 inches on the dot at 220 pounds. And then we've got a tight end at the University of Iowa, Gavin Hoffman, who was actually our first 220-pound 40-inch jumper. He hit 40.5 at Mizzou's football camp.
And it's like, folks, you got to realize these guys 220 pounds, you know, linebackers, DNs that are hitting over 40 inches. I mean, there are light, explosive NFL receivers and defensive backs at the NFL Combine that don't hit 40 inches.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hitting 38, 39, which is still really good. I'd say anything over 36 inches, 3 feet is pretty decent.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you've got lighter guys that aren't even able to explode off the ground like that.
So I put together a chart several years ago based on all the metrics that the NFL provided and my buddies at the collegiate strength and conditioning level provided.
Right.
And came up with a chart, and it's essentially broken down into like super elite, you know, on down. And I want to say it was like 36 plus or 37 plus puts you in the elite category. Yeah. And then 40 puts you in that super elite. And Kier, gosh, I'm forgetting his last name right now, but he was a strength coach at the collegiate level at a variety of institutions. He replied and was like, this list backs up my experience. He's like, at his location, he was like, we had 400 plus athletes. We had one that could hit 40 inches.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was like, so yeah, super elite is the appropriate title for those guys.
All right, we will go to clip 26. So this is hard to see, but this is, we're getting old, so our eyes, right? This is the kneeling to standing broad jump.
Yeah, I haven't done this one in a while, so I'm trying to even recall who the athlete was here. But essentially, I wanted to work on rate of force development through the hip. And having somebody go from a kneeling position into like having them jump and get both feet under them from that position requires a good amount of hip RFD. And then we follow that up with the broad jump because what's a good way to say it? They're in a non-ideal position. Like they're not getting a counter movement to load. They're already in a semi-squatted position, so they've got to apply that force really rapidly and a high amount of it.
Yeah, it's not like when you're doing a typical broad jump and you're starting with the arms overhead and then you swing down and you get that elastic component, that recoil, that
So he's getting the advantage of the stretch reflex a bit because I can see he goes into the arm swing when he's in the kneeling position. So he gets a bit of, a bit of benefit right there. But into that broad jump, he's not, because he's coming out of already what looks to be close to about 45 degrees.
Yep. Yeah. All right. We will go to the next clip, which would be clip 27. So these are just some still images, if I remember correctly. So just some lateral frontal plane work again, jumps. Strength training there with the lunges. And then this is interesting. So this is just showing, you want to talk about working in that lateral plane and throwing velocity for pitchers.
So there's research out there that shows that the better your ability, and they use I don't remember the title they call them, but it's essentially what you and I might call a skater jump with a two-leg landing. The better the athlete was at that movement, the more power they could display in that movement, correlated to higher throwing velocities. So again, like you mentioned, frontal plane is one of the most undertrained elements in the industry. So here I just provided a couple examples of what we do. So there he's doing a landmine, essentially just shifting in that frontal plane left to right. And the earlier clips look like, if we go back to that first one.
Yep.
So this exercise, they start on the box and then they jump down from that 6-inch box into a skater jump. Okay. So again, dealing with a bit of eccentric shock through that lower half, and then displacing. So a rapid RFD, overcoming that eccentric element.
So baseball pitchers do these types of exercises, work in that lateral or frontal plane, strengthen the...
And this athlete in particular, like I believe his dad told me that his velocity went from 78, 79 to 91, 92 miles per hour. And ultimately he's going to go on and pitch at the collegiate level. So it worked anecdotally, and it's working.
Yeah, and you think about driving off the mound when you're pitching off the rubber. I mean, it's so much of it is glute strength and power because of hip extension. I mean, you need those external rotators of the hip to be strong. You need to have the mobility to go into hip internal rotation. And so, all of that is so important, and really to save the arm too, you know, if the lower body is powerful and strong, you're going to be less likely to sustain things like ulnar collateral ligament injuries and elbow injuries because you're using the lower half. I mean,
Sparta, are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
Dr. Wagner's company. They've got contracts with, or at least they did, with a good amount of MLB teams. And almost their entire platform there is predicated on, if we can find guys who are better at landing, they will likely be the ones less likely to suffer upper body injuries as a result of pitching.
Yep.
Because their bodies are better at tolerating that eccentric stress and spreading it out.
Yeah, really good points. We will go to, let's see, clip 28.
Another old school one. This was originally a Vine.
Yep.
Which doesn't exist anymore. But McNellis just doing some what do we call them? Multi-directional hurdle jumps. And essentially we would just kind of randomly assign a pattern and just ask them to jump through it as quickly as they can.
So the lower hurdle height, you're working on more of that elastive reactive component. Then when you have to transition and jump over the hurdle that's higher, obviously you're going to have to put more force into the ground, produce a little more power. And,
again, just surfing that, essentially not even going into the strength side, just surfing the power area of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah. And then I like how you add just the burst out at the end. Yeah.
Because, again, on the field, they're going to be coming out of less than ideal positions and having to get going. So want to train it.
Jumping, changing direction in that those different planes and then bursting forward. Yeah.
What's interesting about Ryan there is he was being recruited by a guy, and I was on the sideline at one of his games, and I was talking with the recruiter who was there to look at him. And he said, my recruiting territory is like Ohio, Georgia, states that produce some high-quality football players.
Right.
And he was like, this kid is probably the best I've seen. He was like, if he played at one of those other states, he's probably a 3 or 4 star recruit. But because he was here in Kansas, they kind of discounted his
football
abilities.
Players kind of get overlooked. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to clip 29. So again, this is the Colorado Rockies pitcher. Well, I think he's been getting called up back and forth between AAA and the Rockies, but we've got lateral plyo box jumps.
Yeah. So one thing to his credit is he is the hardest throwing high school pitcher in the history of baseball. As to my knowledge, that still holds. Threw 102 miles an hour as a senior. I know they put out tweets about him whenever he pitches, both at AAA and the MLB. Like, he's 100 plus routinely. But here, essentially, we're training the frontal plane. We went to the lateral plyo box because Coach Hallwaddell did some research again when he was at Washburn and showed that an angled platform allowed the athlete to produce more force in the movement. So I went out and found one of these lateral plyo boxes and went to work with it. And you can see it applies a better area of contact for the foot, so it allows for more force to be put into the position in which you want the athlete moving.
Right. All right. We'll go to clip 30. So you've seen these in some other clips we've shown, but again, just the seated box jumps.
Yeah, and because offensive linemen have to produce a rapid rate of force development from a position similar to this, where they're already in a semi-squatted state.
Yep.
We're just training Nick on it, and I told him, like, a lot of times you'll see coaches like tell their athletes, "Hey, leave your foot on the ground." I'm not a huge fan of that in this exercise because it allows for longer ground contact time.
Right.
Like, I want a very rapid
you want them to pop off the ground. Yeah.
I want a really rapid application of force and displacement, and that's what we're getting here.
Great.
And he's 300 plus pounds.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. What's his weight? Because people see this and it's like, that's a big guy jumping. I mean, what is that? The height?
He's 6'4", and he's 300. I think he's 305 pounds. And that is, I think that's 45 inches.
40 some inches, I was going to say, yeah. Looks like it. All right, we'll go to the next clip 31. Some single leg jump repeats.
Yep. So we've got Coach Cash here. I believe this was just after training camp with the Browns. Again, we're unilateral power is our overarching theme. But again, you can see as he lands, he's got a propriocept.
Yeah.
And especially if I asked him to close his eyes here, it would have taken it to the next level.
Yeah. Yep. See how he manipulates these exercises to make them more difficult, especially as the athlete progresses? Yeah, think about doing that with your eyes closed. And those proprioceptors are really going to have to fire up to control the amount of ankle dorsiflexion you go into, the amount of knee flexion and the amount of hip flexion, and then just controlling the core and trunk as well. With the eyes closed, it's going to be really difficult. All right, we'll go into clip 32. So trap bar deadlift jumps and hurdle jumps.
Another contrast pairing, again, just surfing that entire power spectrum. So we've got a pretty good load. I can't tell what's on the bar there, but pretty good load. Both those athletes are under 200 pounds. And we're trying to achieve displacement with the trap bar. And then they've got to go into a rapid displacement over the hurdles.
Right. And I really like the trap bar because it does kind of save your lower back.
Yeah.
You get less shearing forces on the lumbar spine with where your hands are placed and how you're kind of positioned, parallel or inside that load. Yeah. So trap bar deadlifts are really... And
it's a position they'll mimic on the field, that athletic position that's common throughout sports. Whereas with a barbell, you start tall, you go into the counter movement, so you get that benefit. Here it's eliminated.
Yeah, Yeah, this is a really good pairing. I like this. All right, we will go to clip 33. So now we're moving into the change of direction and agility category. So we have a few clips here of what you do to work on change of direction and agility. So just some defensive back drills with some of the...
These are both NFL players, I believe. So actually, I don't lead this element. It's Coach Cash, who was the safeties coach here at the University of Kansas for a while, and he does a lot of private work with NFL players. He's essentially just putting them through some change of direction tasks that they might be asked to perform at camp, just to get them ready for those scenarios in camp. So they're not going in.
And you see how he's, people, if you're watching this, he's going to be directing them when to change direction with the football, go right, go left. And that's important because training agility, and we talked about this on the ride over, right? Like, if you're training for agility, you have to be able to react quickly to an unexpected stimulus and change direction. If you're just doing change of direction training, like you have some cones set up and you're wanting athletes to change direction at each cone, well, it's pre-programmed in your mind. You know, when I hit that cone, I got to cut to the left. When I hit that one, I got to cut to the right. And coaches confuse this. If you're truly training agility, the athlete needs to be changing direction in reaction to an unexpected stimulus.
If there's no reactive element to it, you're not training agility.
Right. And then, which we talked about on the way over, agility ladders. Like, what's your beef with agility ladders? Because I don't like them either. I think they're great to kind of warm up an athlete, but agility ladders aren't really used for agility.
I'm not even a huge fan of them for that purpose, because the force output into the ground is so low.
So low, yeah.
I've been able to find one study that was done on it, and I want to say it was like 30%. Whenever they, if I recall correctly, they took athlete and they had them go through agility ladder and then replicated the drills using cones. And I want to say that whenever the ladder constraint was placed there, it was 30% of what they saw out of even a cone, you know where you're going. So you're going to have a mitigated force element there. And for that to still be so much lower, like I don't even think I think you're doing them a disservice by asking them to go through the ladder. Now, I will say, if it's an athlete coming back from injury and you want that mitigated force, by all means. Or if it's an athlete who's pre-puberty, might still be developing just broad spectrum
motor control, broad spectrum learning how to move their feet, being accurate with foot placement and stuff like that. Yeah, then the agility ladders work. But yeah, I agree with you. They're they were so popular for a while, but they really don't train what you're trying to train, which is explosive change of direction. And
Dr. Wagner and I have had this conversation as well. And he's like, I think ultimately what he said was like, if you want to change, if you just want to affect change of direction, he's like, train in the weight room in the frontal plane. That's the easiest way to do it. And then go out there on the field and move through the patterns with a reactive element, and that becomes agility.
Right. I agree. That's well put. All right, we'll go to clip 34.
So we've got Chiefs cornerback Echo Boydo. And again, I labeled this COD because he knows the drills.
Right.
So he knows, but again, there is a mild reactive element to it. So he's training agility in a sense. But
because I think if the sound was up when he's doing his drop,
reacts.
He'll say something like
he reacts
go, and
to
then he'll react to
stimulus.
That. So that would be training agility if he's having to react. But he knows his drop. Yeah. Like he knows when he's going to
told, hey, you're coming back, or you're going 45 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a hybrid. So I just labeled it COD because it's not a true reactive stimulus.
Right.
But we've got him hooked up to our Raptor unit here. So he's getting resistance in one direction and then assistance in the other. So he's going from resisted to a bit of overspeed displacement.
Right.
And then we've got him doing a zigzag sprint, which, so let me preface this. Echo is, up until this year, last season, I believe, they flat out told him, like, you are the fastest player on the roster here. He at his NFL Pro Day was clocked by some coaches at sub 4.3. Like, he is an elite level speed athlete. The thing about the NFL is if you look at the list of best 40 times of all time, it's highly populated with guys that are busts, that never had a substantial career. So being fast is only one element of success. You have to be able to change direction at high speed.
Right.
And ultimately, that's what we're training here.
Yeah, that's so important. And especially at the cornerback position,
Yeah.
right? Because you're having to react to the receiver running a route, which the receiver knows where they're going.
Exactly.
They know where they're running the route. As a corner, which I think is probably the hardest position to play on the field, and that's where you need your most athletic players, is at cornerback. You're having to react to that unexpected stimulus and change directions as quickly and rapidly as possible to be able, if you're in man coverage, to stick with that receiver. So yeah,
that's
it's
why,
so difficult.
That's why the drills are pre-programmed here, he knows, but the element we are stressing here is time. Like on those zigzag sprints, we would time them. Like, how quick can you get through this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Important metrics, important things to keep track of. So we'll go to clip 35. I thought this one was kind of cool.
Another old one.
Old one.
Another old one. So these are all collegiate soccer players. And the athlete in the middle is the stimulus. I think we call this like the cat and mouse game.
Yeah, medicine ball, cat and mouse.
Yeah. So the medicine ball just provides a bit of load that's easy to get rid of if we want to get rid of.
And you're going to have to overcome that load and that inertia as you change directions from left to right, and control the rotational aspect too. Don't rotate your core too much with the ball.
Bingo. So that's why the medicine ball was used instead of like a barbell or a weighted vest or something for that extra trunk stimulation. But the athletes have to react to that, the mouse in the middle, and they're the cats trying to chase it. But they have to stay within, I think we had about 10 yards there. And a fun one to a bit different way to train the frontal plane. And it has that added benefit of doing it at a decent amount of speed. You know?
Yeah, and young, high school athletes, even middle school kids, they're going to love this. And it has a little bit of a competitive component.
And they're all friends. They all, one of them went to Miege, the other two were from St. James. So they all knew each other, played on the same club soccer team. So, competitive element, and it was a bit different than the traditional frontal plane training. Anytime
an exercise can be both effective in training what you're trying to train, which is this agility component, and fun, that's a win for everybody.
Yeah. Your engagement skyrockets.
Right. Engagement, they buy in, they want to come back, right? Mm-hmm. So, all right. So we'll move on to kind of the next category. We're going to get into sled work, resisted sprints, and sprint technique. So we're moving into, let's see what clip we're at. Clip 36.
So this is one of the pairings we've gone to here recently. This is Quentin Orello. He was an all-conference safety at Dartmouth. He actually I gotta phrase this right. He jumped 43 and a half inches at his NFL Pro Day. He out-jumped the Vertex. And then they clocked him at 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. So a outlier among outliers. Great, phenomenal athlete. But this is one of the contrast pairings we're using a lot now. We've got the run rockets applying our resistance to their sprint. And then we have them contrast that with the 10+2. Orello has our second fastest ever time. I think Echo, if I recall correctly, is number one at 1:27. And Orello, I think, hit 1:29. I don't know if it was on this day, but
yeah, it's really good.
It looks like he was in the 1:3s at this day. But Brendan Thompson, who was a sprinter at the University of Iowa, sent me a chart for this, and it's essentially like under 1:3 is super elite, under 1:4 is elite, on down to like average, which is like 1:6 or something. But yeah, I mean, it's just contrast training for sprints. And
the cable there on the run rocket that's resisting him. I mean, the reason you do resisted sprints, I mean, one of the reasons is just, in this, to improve the drive and acceleration. Mm-hmm. But it's really, it's going to help you to improve your stride length because you're going to have to produce more force in the ground to overcome the cable. If you're producing more force down and back into the ground, well, the ground's going to react with an equal and opposite force up and out. So it should help improve.
And I remember this clip now. So I applied a bit of AI movement tracking to it, and I plugged in his all-time best score, and it told me like movement efficiency relative to his all-time best.
Right.
And I think he was like, I don't even remember, 90%, 90 something.
Yeah. And then, well, it was a few clips back with Echo. I don't think I have any overspeed like towing, but that would help improve leg turnover if you're doing some towing.
I do have some clips of that, and that was one thing we did with both Echo and that entire NFL Pro Day training class that Echo came through was we would do the I don't know if it was a 10, it might have been a 5+2. But yeah, we did overspeed towing from 0 step on.
Yeah, so you're assisting them in the sprint by basically pulling them.
And
that helps with leg turnover.
On that with Bryce and a few other guys. It's published out there on Simply Faster. But there was a substantial improvement in the ability for an athlete to accelerate after they had chronic exposure to that overspeed from 0 step.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. We'll move into the next clip 37. So this is the same thing, just another athlete here.
This is the University of Iowa tight end Gavin Hoffman doing the same exact pairing. But he's a 6'5", 230-pound athlete, and he's in the 1.3s.
Yeah, and there you can see your charts, your super elite times, the seconds. Yeah. All right, we'll go to clip 38.
So here we've got...
that's David
Olajiga. Hopefully I said that right. Yep. So he was doing his NFL Pro Day prep with us and ultimately ended up signing with the Los Angeles Rams. So here he's doing, I want to say this was probably an 800-pound sled. And we're just asking him, hey, sprint. Mm-hmm. Get this moving at a high rate of speed. Ultimately, anecdotally, it paid off. He was, for athletes, over 310 pounds. He was number 1 in both vertical jump, 40-yard dash, I think maybe broad jump too, I can't recall. But just, again, an outlier among outliers.
Yeah,
like for an athlete of that size, I know I think the Chiefs told us they got him in the 4.9s at his 40-yard dash. Other defensive tackles to achieve that were like 280 pounds. Yeah. And he was, the day of his NFL Pro Day was like 321. Interesting thing about him too, he's only played football for like 3 years. Yeah. Came to America from England and was a rugby player, I believe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, phenomenal specimen.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, the sled work. I know you guys love the sled at TopSpeed.
Yeah.
You do a ton of sled work. You want to talk any more about the sled and like why you like using it so much?
I think I've covered it in prior talks here, but I mean, it's a concentric dominant movement, plane specific to sprinting. So because there's not that huge eccentric element to it, you can train with it year round.
Yeah.
You can vary the hand positions, the loads to train different elements of, if you want to train like 0 step, or you want to train 3-step acceleration or 5-step or 10-step, you can, it's a really versatile tool.
Yeah. I mean, it's coming from a position where you're motionless and really training that drive and horizontal force into the ground. Keeping good body lean as you come out, good shin angles. It's probably also, I don't know if there's any data on this, but this is probably really good for training that Achilles tendon to withstand high tensile stress. So, I mean, I don't know if there's any data out there on that.
I did a podcast with Challenger Strength a few years back about that because Derek Hansen had come out with a post where he was basically crapping on sleds, and he was attributing Achilles tendon ruptures in the NFL to perhaps like heavy sled training. And so Jerry reached out, asked me to come on to his podcast and talk about, because he knew that we did heavy sled training. So I reached out to Aaron Borgman, who spent, I think, 13 years as a PT with various NFL teams. And we talked about it. And I said, let me bounce this off of you and just tell me if it holds weight. I was like, so you've got the Achilles tendon under, it's probably the only element under eccentric stress in this exercise.
Right.
And it's having to deal with a good amount of kinetic stress because you can't do this exercise really slow.
Right.
You wouldn't, you just spin in place. I said, so hear me out here. We're training the Achilles tendon under load in a capacity in which it might occur on the field, as players collide.
And eccentric loading of tendons, sorry to interrupt, but I just thought like that's going to help with collagen alignment,
Bingo.
How those collagen fibers align. Did he get at that?
And that's what we were getting at. Is Jorge Carvajal and I even spoke about it as well. And he was like, it's going to allow that fiber matrix to adapt into like a cleaner matrix.
Right.
Whereas like if you do it, improperly, you could develop some kinks in that fiber matrix, which ultimately lead to a tendinopathy.
Yeah, that's what you don't want. Your collagen is a protein, and it's all over in different connective tissues, bones, all different parts of your body. But in tendons, you want those collagen fibers to be aligned properly. You don't want them all knotted up and in a mess. So that eccentric loading of it with an exercise like this, I would think would help keep those collagen fibers aligned appropriately so that you can withstand that tensile stress when the season rolls around.
Yeah. And then ultimately, speaking of collagen, I found a study prepping for a presentation last year where they talked about specifically the Achilles tendon adaptation that occurs when an athlete is supplementing with collagen as well. What they found was the surface area improved to a greater extent in the athletes who were supplementing with collagen versus those who weren't. And during my presentation, I mentioned that because I think last year there were more Achilles tendon ruptures than there ever had been. So maybe that could be a way to mitigate that issue is have the athlete supplement, train for that adaptation, increase the surface area, and then that stress has a wider area to spread over instead of that where it might suffer an acute failure. It's mitigated because it's spread over a wider area.
That's interesting. Stick with the whey protein for muscle and use the collagen for potential tendon benefits, tendon health. And Coach Potts, they have a supplement line out now, so I don't know.
We do. I wasn't trying to plug it, but the reason I created the supplement line was because all the research, which unfortunately not a lot of it occurs in the U.S. A lot of it is in Europe and other countries. So you have to go outside of your traditional research base to find it. But it's overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
Penn State was one of the few universities here who did it with their athletes, and they saw a really significant reduction in joint pain at both the knee and ankle with their entire athlete population.
All right, we'll move on to clip number 39. So we have the Real Runner sprints and arm-assisted treadmill sprints. So this is the Real Runner.
Yeah. So it's a hydraulically resisted sprint machine. Essentially, you're emphasizing the mechanical work done at the hip. And then we pair that.
And it's resisting. The Real Runner you're getting resistance both in hip flexion as you drive the knee up and in hip extension as you're driving the foot and leg back. So it's resisting both directions.
Unlike the pneumatic one like Kaiser, which assists you into flexion and only resists extension, the Real Runners do it in both directions. And then we contrast that with an arm-assisted, just what we call anchoring onto the treadmill, working on turnover there.
Right, and they can kind of, with assisting the arms, maybe push up a little, take a little bit of their body weight off, but really work on that leg turnover.
And that's ultimately because that's the goal. I don't mind that. And he hits 23.2, or at least the belt does.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, you can see it. So here we're inhibiting stride turnover, and then to try and stimulate that neuromuscular system. And then here we're doing the exact opposite, and we're assisting it.
That's a great pairing. And you think about speed, it's really just a product of stride length and stride frequency. So if you can increase your stride length by, one of the ways is becoming stronger, resisted sprints, things like that, and then enhance your turnover, the rate at which you can pick those feet up off the ground, you're going to be faster.
Again, anecdotally, it worked out really well. So this is Micah McGavran. He's the catcher for Olathe West High School. He's a big kid. I want to say he's about 6'3", 225 to 230, and he just ran a 6'8" in the 60-yard dash.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and anecdotally, it paid off because this kid is big and fast.
Okay. We will move into, what do we got next? Clip number 40.
Okay. So we got Larson hooked up to the Run Rocket. And actually, I took this, putting the dowel on the athlete's back from Stu McMillan down at Altus. Whenever I was down there, he was having athletes do wickets and just generic sprinting, but taking their arms away. Again, just kind of increasing the amount of mechanical work done at the hip, without the ability for the body to sync up.
Right.
He's got to actively pull his leg into flexion instead of just letting it occur naturally with that rhythm.
You can also check, you can also see asymmetries. And if you're looking at ground contact times of each foot,
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at that bar. Like when he plants his left foot, it looks like it's on the ground longer than the right.
Yeah, with baseball guys, the amount of times they swing, they're gonna have an asymmetry there through the trunk.
And asymmetry isn't always a bad thing. It's like we talk about that a lot.
As long as it's at a reasonable level.
Right. Yeah. It's not always a bad thing. And sometimes it's just a functional adaptation to the sport you play.
Yeah. That's my big problem with the systems like GOTA. Where they're like, oh, we studied the ideal athlete mechanic. Right. And I had this conversation with one. I said, well, what's the ideal?
Right. What
He's like a guy like Jerry Rice and Tom Brady and Usain Bolt. And when he said Usain Bolt, it caught my eye. Because I said, okay, explain to me how Bolt's the ideal for everyone. Because Bolt had pretty extreme
lateral flexion.
He had I forget what's the disease kids suffer from where they have to wear the back brace.
Did he have scoliosis? He had scoliosis. So I didn't know that.
He has a leg that's an inch and a half longer than the other. I said his movement signature is unique to him and him alone.
Okay, which would make sense because if you see him coming out of the blocks, he kind of has that. Yeah. Spinal lateral flexion.
His body adapted.
And I remember one of the
constraints.
Yeah, one of the knees even kind of caves in, like valgus stress, like it bows in. Like there's a unique. Yeah. He kind of has this.
It's a very unique movement signature because of the constraints of his body.
Yeah, but he learned to overcome, and who cares? He ran a 9.5800 meters, a world record holder. So who cares?
Yeah, yeah. But if he were, let's say, younger and encountered one of these guys that uses the GOTA system, they probably would have tried to coach him out of it.
Yeah.
And that's a big threat to youth today. Like actually using my son as an example, we've got coaches who do throwing programs out at the gym. We talked about this on the way here. Like, biomechanics in pitchers have been studied out the rear end here over the last few years. And now they have AI systems that'll tell you your movement efficiency because there are markers that can identify potential threats to health. So my son just is there at the gym one day with me. He grabs one of the plyo balls, and of course it took him a while to hit the target, but he hits the target. He threw 35 miles an hour as a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And one of our coaches who originally is from the Latin America watched him, and he was like, hey, do not let anyone coach your son out of his inherent movement pattern. Yeah. He's like, the stuff he's doing with his front arm and everything are things we have to reteach kids now.
Right.
Because they've been coached out of them by their club coaches or their high school, whoever it is.
By, quote, biomechanics experts, right?
But you watch kids and they do it naturally.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep, they find the most effective movement pattern just in natural play, playing. Let kids play. All right, the next one we'll go to is clip number 41.
The old single leg sled sprint. Yeah. I wish he had his hands a bit lower, so there was a bit more horizontal element to it. But ultimately, I needed a demo video very quickly, and Coach Cash was nice enough to do it for me. Yeah, essentially, we're training unilateral power.
Right, explosiveness through the glutes, the quads.
Yeah.
That obviously the gastroc soleus Achilles complex. So yeah, we'll go to the next one, which is which one was on? So clip 42. Clip 42
should be the Wicket Run.
So this is cool because this shows sprint technique between a comparison difference between a athlete, I believe, on the right, and then the sprinter is on the left, and then you're doing Wicket Runs here.
Yeah. So that original video I found out came from Ken Clark. And ultimately what he was highlighting was like the movement discrepancy between someone who trains to sprint versus like a team sport athlete. And you can see like the backside mechanics. And that's where a lot of the hamstring injuries occur, is that elongated backside.
Yeah, go back to the start of that video, Missy. And so you see on the right, that elongated, like you said, backside mechanics on the right.
It's just a less efficient movement.
Kind of the forward lean. They're not as upright. They're not as vertical. The hips are not as stacked underneath the torso. But you see the sprinter on the left. If we play it one more time, sprinter on the left, they're nice and stacked. The hips right under the torso. Good high knee drive and knee lift.
So they're getting that vertical GRF into the ground. And then the athlete in the video, he's currently a wide receiver at Kansas State. So it's actually really common among team sports athletes. They'll tend to overstride and they'll heel strike out in front of them, which is obviously a braking force, slows them down. So we spent some time doing Wicket Runs to kind of train him out of that, so he could learn that 4-foot
strike.
4-foot strike, where to place it, how to create a more efficient movement pattern.
Yeah, because you can see the wickets. He's running nice and stacked here. High knee drive, hips under the torso. Yeah, that looks great. I mean, he's looking a lot more like a sprinter there versus a team sport athlete.
Ultimately, he went on to run a laser timed, I think 4 or 5, and was able to continue his career. He was a Rockhurst football player. Now, ultimately, he's at the Division I level at Kansas State.
All right, great. We'll move on to clip 43. So these are just some still images, but here you got TopSpeed Hill, right? You want to talk about TopSpeed Hill? So some resisted sprinting against gravity up a hill.
Yep. I call hills autocorrect for sprint mechanics. I mean, everything you want in a good sprinter, it emphasizes. They've got to have good front side mechanics.
Good ankle dorsiflexion.
Yeah, exactly.
Good knee drive.
Yep. It helps the leg cycle. And then the only thing you could probably complain about is it elongates your ground contact time. But it's got to, because you're running uphill. You know, it's preemptively meeting the foot.
Right.
So I love them. You know, it's a low risk way to train speed as well, because you've got mitigated output. So it's low risk for hamstrings and quads.
Right, but it really strengthens that posterior chain. It's really going to strengthen those glutes and hammies and
calves too. Like
it's great. Yeah, and it's the thing is you don't have to have equipment. Go find a nice hill somewhere.
We had 20 plus kids there, all training speed, all at one time. There's zero chance we could have done that as effectively in our gym.
Right. I mean, you could also do plyometrics up them too, jumps and bounds and all kinds of stuff. Do you do any of that?
We do. I've gotten away from like the broad jump.
Yeah.
Because of that preemptive
striking of the foot.
Yeah. That one I didn't see the benefit that we were chasing there. Because a lot of times they weren't reaching like a terminal hip extension there.
Okay.
But that said, I am a big fan of doing it in a single leg fashion.
Yeah. Okay.
And you know, we train laterally, like frontal plane as well.
Reminds me of Walter Payton, probably my favorite ever NFL running back
Yep.
had a hill that he ran going back into the late
He would
70s
drag
and
a
80s.
tire up it.
Yeah. Yep. All right. We will go on to the next one. So this is clip number 44. So here you got former Chiefs and current Miami Dolphins receiver Tyreek Hill.
So Tyreek was referred into us by, I forget if it was a teammate or a staff member with the Chiefs. But ultimately, this was, if you remember, early in his career, he made All-Pro as a kick returner. But he wasn't seen as a premier wide receiver.
Yep.
And one of the things that they told me was, they said, look, this guy can fly. He doesn't change direction really well. He doesn't stop really well. He's not able to manipulate his speed really well.
Right.
So what we would do here is we used the run rocket, and we had him do a resisted, red light, green light drill.
Yeah, like stop and go.
Yep.
So he was reacting to you say stop, go, stop, go.
We had an auditory stimulus there. And then we removed the run rocket. So he was in that neuromuscularly prime state.
Right.
And he was in that potentiated state. And same thing, we just redid the drill
Sprint,
in
stop.
that potentiated state.
Sprint, stop. Yeah.
So it's, whereas in one form, the acceleration element was the primary thing being trained. Here, it's the deceleration element.
Right. And that's so important. You have to think about this. When you're running a route, whether it's a corner route, you're running a deep out route, a deep in, a comeback, whatever the route is, a post corner, and you're having to change directions twice there because it's a double move. The quicker you can decelerate, get that body to stop on the dime, well, then it's going to be more likely that you're going to be able to lose that defensive back, decelerate, and then actually have the power and being able to put enough force on the ground to overcome your inertia, your body's inertia, and change direction. And so, being able to decelerate as rapidly as possible is very important. You hear coaches talk about getting in and out of your cuts. They get into and out of their cuts quickly. That's an very important aspect for a receiver.
And this phase of training preceded his breakout year as a receiver. So this was that year where...
It should have been like 2019, somewhere around there, 2018, 2019.
I think 18, if I recall correctly. But this was the season where he became a Pro Bowl wide receiver.
Yeah, all-pro as a wide receiver, not as a kick returner, right? Yeah, yep.
I think he led the NFL in touchdown catches this year.
Yeah. All right, we'll go on to the next kind of category, contrast pairings. We just have maybe 4 more clips here, but... so clip 45. So here's your bottom-up squats you mentioned earlier.
Yep. Now this is not, I don't believe, this is Peter Clute. No, this is CJ Perez, who was he spent some time in the NFL with the Ravens and then in the UFL up till this season. So he was on the Remington Award watch list at Temple University. He's a center. He's about 300 pounds. He's a bit shorter stature than most teams like their offensive linemen. But it's our contrast pairing here, working the top end, of the squat. And then again, training that RFD element for an offensive lineman, I think is crucial.
Right. Yeah. They're normally in that squatted stance.
Yep.
Pop those feet on the ground, produce that force real quick, and get up on the box. Yep. And then here, you've got that again. You can really load this because you're naturally going to be stronger at the top of the lift, but really load that up and just work on extending those hips and knees in that squat.
Yeah. And he's got phenomenal lower body strength.
Yeah. Good hip mobility, too. I mean, that's amazing for a lineman, a guy that size. I mean, being able to bring those knees up. He's really mobile through the hips.
So he was...
Because people always think, the bigger guys are not mobile, but that isn't always the case. I mean, you can see his hip mobility there. It's really good.
I'll tell you flat out, the difference between your elite level offensive linemen and your ones who don't reach the professional level is mobility.
Yeah. I mean, that's...
I've been fortunate enough to work with enough of them that have reached the professional level that I can flat out tell you, that's the separator. That's the divide.
Yep. Fluid through the hips, fluid movement. All right, we'll go to, what do we have next? Clip 46.
So this one, we just label it a boxless step up. One of my coworkers with the current actually showed me this variation, because normally we do step ups onto a box, but it was just a lot easier to do them from the ground. And then we have her, that's Auburn University volleyball player, Sydney Hondel. So we're training unilateral strength, a bit of proprioceptive action as well with the chains. And then we have her contrast that with an alternating split jump, working strength here and then power.
Yeah. So that, again, this contrast pairing, or it's either called contrast training or complex training, where you pair the strength training exercise with a biomechanically similar plyometric, high velocity exercise. This elicits muscle potentiation. I have another video on that if you want to get into all the physiology and theories behind why this works. But yeah, typically you do this resistance exercise, and then you go and do a power, high velocity plyometric or sprint movement, and you're going to get better output. You're going to get faster sprint times, higher jumps, things like that when you do this contrast training. So we'll go to, was there anything else you wanted to add on this?
No, the only thing I might mention is you do that chronically enough and you become more athletic.
Yeah. This is a great way. Because, it used to be a lot of times strength coaches would divide up the resistance training session, the strength work, and keep that separate from the plyometric and speed work. But it can all be incorporated together. And it's actually, a lot of the research shows more beneficial to.
It's got a great synergy.
Yeah.
I used to, and learning it in school, you learn like, oh, this is the right way to do it. You need your strength on one day, save your energy and do plyometrics. And then you get outside of a school setting and you learn like, okay, like actually if we kind of combine all of this, properly, we're taking things to the next level.
And that's where sometimes what you learn, and we see this in exercise science, sports science, sometimes the strength coaches are ahead of what the research is showing, and then the research kind of validates what they're doing. So it's like,
I'm sure the kids in your class are learning a whole different system than we learn.
Yep.
I mean, shoot, when I was coming through, the way to train power was the Olympic lifts.
Yeah.
And now we're getting research out there that shows that like, hey, there's a better way. You know, loaded jumps are a better way to train.
Well, and what was it Buddy Moore said about Olympic lifting? Like when the NSCA was formed back in 1984, I think his beef was, well, are we so big on Olympic lifting because we're just trying to train more Olympic lifters because there's not a lot of them in the United States? So we're having our football players do Olympic lifting.
So that you can identify high performers and kind of...
And then shuttle them into Olympic weightlifting, which, and I know, like, when I played football, we did Olympic lifting, and we're training powerful triple extension of the hip and the knee and the ankle. But there's so many other ways you can do that, like you said, with the sled work and some of the things we're seeing here. I mean, so are you absolutely, what are your thoughts on it? Are you absolutely against Olympic weightlifting, the cleans, the snatches, all that? Or are you okay with it?
I don't do the cleans. I actually don't mind the snatch, especially a dumbbell snatch, one arm, things like that. We'll do some push press, things like that. I'm not a big fan of the cleans, and that was because of an experience I had at the collegiate level. I worked with a baseball team. Their strength program was 100% Olympic lifts. That was it.
Yeah.
That team, 85% of the roster had wrist or shoulder issues. It had, I want to say 13 of them. It was bad enough it warranted surgery.
And you have to think about that as a strength coach. The risk-reward ratio of every exercise that you're programming. Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Exactly. And then when I got to the professional level with the Royals, they actually banned them.
Yeah.
So you were not allowed because of a wrist injury that occurred with one of the high-dollar players. So, you had to learn other methods. So it was like, okay, well, the one I really started with was weighted box jumps, and then it's like, okay, we're seeing really good results.
Trap bar deadlifts are good.
You grow your toolbox.
Yeah. All right, we'll go to the next. I think we're on clip 47.
Yeah.
So another contrast pairing here. Your front squats with the barbell and then the hurdle jumps.
That looks like Washburn University basketball player Zaid Dajani, who is an elite jumper. So he's a 40 standing, and he's probably a 43 to 45 inch max jumper. Like he's super elite. So here we've got a pause front squat, stressing that anterior chain, having him overcome inertia, and then going to the opposite end of the spectrum and having him do a rapid force application. Looks like he's got the Tendo on it as well.
Yep. So tracking his velocity on the squat
and working that elastic reactive quality with the repeat hurdle jump.
And that's great that you can track, the velocity with those units, because it's like, plus the athletes want to know and they get competitive and let me try to move the bar faster the next time. And
I was a big fan of those gravity boxes. The only issue I had is we would have athletes move the spool couldn't handle the speed.
I keep saying Tendo but gravity box.
Yeah. Well, I use both. I have both. And recently another company has reached out and offered to send some units out as well. So I'll do another test run through with a different company. But the spool wasn't able to keep up with the speed. So what would happen is the cord would stop feeding back in. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that was the feedback I had to give them. Is like, look, these things are great. I love the small footprint. I love that because you can just take a plate and they magnetize to it and we're anchored there. You could put it right in front of the athlete. But I need something that can handle higher velocities.
And do you track their velocity, chart it? And if you start seeing declines in velocity, do you think, well, maybe they're kind of overtrained, doing too much work,
so I'll
back
pull
things
them
off?
I'll pull them off of either load or reps. And that stems from Corey Kennedy presented some research at one of the NSCA conventions, and it talked about what happens to your fast twitch fiber types whenever you train into fatigue. And that's one where they found a fiber type conversion from type 2X down to like type 2A, which it's still higher force production than a slow twitch fiber, but it wasn't to the same extreme that your type 2X was. When they trained into fatigue, there was a pretty big conversion, and it lasted for quite a while.
Yeah. And like Dr. Fry has talked about with some of her research, and I think you even posted a clip on your Instagram from one of the previous podcasts or interviews I did with him. It's like a big indicator of an athlete being overtrained. One of the primary ones is, they may lose some strength, but it's speed. Yep. Speed is you lose speed. That's the biggest decrement if you're overtrained.
And so with the current, one thing that we do readiness testing. We use the vertical jump, and it's on force plates. We have them just do a counter movement jump, and we look for big changes in output. Now, it's still in its infancy. We're still learning. There's a big difference between an athlete that walks into the facility, changes, gets on the force plate and jump, versus one that spends 5 to 7 minutes prepping to jump.
Right.
So we're still trying to clean it up in that regard. But one thing that it's been pretty good, because we've been able to identify athletes who have some issues because we're seeing a difference in their jump height. But then whenever you pull out the data of what's influencing jump height, it's concentric velocity. It's almost a 100% solid relationship. If your concentric velocity dips, your jump height's going to dip.
Yep.
I've seen a couple of ones where it didn't. Jump height might be higher at a lower velocity, but I'd say it's 99.9% hand in hand. And so, like you talked about, the speed of movement is a great indicator.
Yeah. Well, last one. We have one more clip. There's been a long episode today, so a lot to get through. But this is the last one. It's under the miscellaneous category. So just showing a primer session here with, I think this is Aquinas running back Cal Arndt.
Yep. So he's a young kid, but he'll be their starting tailback. So essentially, we're just doing either accentuated explosive movements or contrast movements. So you saw there he was doing the broad jumps with light dumbbells. Well, when the Olympics were first invented, they had a standing broad jump as a competition. And what they found was if they let them hold really light weights in their hand, I think they were called halters, or I can't pronounce the word, so I'm not going to try it. They achieved further jumps. So I just call those accentuated broad jumps.
Right.
We allow them to hold a light dumbbell or an overspeed broad jump, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And then we followed that up with contrast step replacement, jab steps.
Yeah, so we'll go back through them
again. And then we had him do some proprioceptive work with an overhead barbell with the bands and kettlebells. And
it was just like an isometric hold,
that's just
too.
an isometric.
Yeah.
Allowing that ankle complex to propriocept. And then we finished it up with some overspeed redirects.
Yeah. And this is some work you might do more like, in season or deload.
This would be done either 48 to 24 hours prior to competition, so prior to a game. And it's based on some research that was done in a soccer population that showed a delayed potentiation effect in both speed and agility with those athletes whenever they primed with speed and ballistic movements the day before a game.
It's low loads with the weights here, but yeah, like you said, these are high velocity movements, high speed movements, light loads. There's even some overspeed towing there. But yeah.
And then there's some of the research that it was based on.
Anything else you want to add? That's all of them. That was a lot of clips.
Yeah.
We covered a lot. Yeah. I think we're probably both exhausted at this point because it was a long episode. So.
Yeah, I know. I've got none to add. I think we covered everything we needed to cover. Like you said, it's a long episode. I'm sure people are tired of their screen.
Yeah.
Probably want to de-screen for a bit.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you back and talk about some other stuff at some point. So.
All right. Sounds good.
Yep. Thanks for being here on the show again today, Coach Potts. How can people contact you for your training services or if they have any questions about improving athletic performance?
All of our social media channels are at TopSpeed LLC. So we're easy to reach.
All right. Check them out. If you have any questions for me about the KU Exercise Science program, send an email to jtaylor@ku.edu or call 913-897-8516. Thanks again for watching this episode of Fitness Facts.